My wife sneaked into our paralyzed son's room every single night at 2 in the morning. She told me she was massaging his atrophied muscles. She told me she was the only one who truly sacrificed for our family. I believed her because I wanted to believe her. But when I finally installed a hidden camera inside a smoke detector, I didn't see a loving mother caring for her disabled child. I saw a monster. And I saw the man she was really doing it for. If you think you know the person sleeping next to you, take a deep breath, because what I found on that tape made me load my Colt 1911 and wait in the dark. Before I tell you how I took down the people I loved most, please hit that like button. It helps an old man share the truth with the world. And let me know in the comments where you are watching from. It comforts me to know I am not shouting into the void. My name is Henry. I am 70 years old, and for 40 years I was a general contractor. I built half the foundations in this suburb. I know how to spot a hairline crack in concrete before it brings a whole house down. I know that if the structure is rotting, you can't just paint over it. You have to tear it out. But I never thought I would have to apply that logic to my own marriage. It started on a Tuesday at exactly 2:15 in the morning. I woke up with a mouth as dry as sandpaper. That is one of the indignities of getting old. You don't sleep through the night anymore. Your body wakes you up for water, or for the bathroom, or just to remind you that your joints hurt. I sat up in bed, my back stiff. The other side of the king-sized mattress was empty. The sheets were cold. Lydia was gone again. I didn't think much of it at first. We have been married for 35 years. Lydia is 58, 12 years younger than me, and she has always had more energy. Since our son Lucas had his accident 2 years ago, she has been restless. I put on my slippers and shuffled out into the hallway. The house was silent. It is a big house, a colonial style I renovated myself 10 years ago. I laid every inch of the white oak flooring in this hallway with my own hands. I know every squeak. I know every shadow. And that is why I stopped dead in my tracks. Light was spilling out from under the door of Lucas's room. My heart gave a painful thump against my ribs. Lucas is 32 years old. 2 years ago, a drunk driver T-boned his truck. The settlement was $4.8 million, but no amount of money could buy back his voice or his movement. He is paralyzed from the neck down. He has locked-in syndrome. He can see, he can hear, but he cannot speak. He is trapped in his own body. The doctors said he needs absolute rest at night to let his brain heal. So why was the light on? I walked closer, my steps silent on the wood I knew so well. I reached for the doorknob, but before I could touch it, the door swung open. Lydia almost crashed into me. She gasped a sharp, terrified sound that echoed in the quiet hall. "Henry," she hissed, clutching her chest. "You nearly gave me a heart attack." I didn't answer immediately. I was too busy looking at her. My wife is a beautiful woman. She prides herself on her appearance. But standing there in the dim light of the hallway, she looked wild. Her silk nightgown was disheveled. Her forehead was slick with sweat, damp strands of blonde hair sticking to her temples. She was breathing hard, rhythmic, and heavy like she had just run a mile on the treadmill. But the strangest thing was her hands. She was wiping them frantically on the silk of her robe, over and over again, like she was trying to clean something off. "What are you doing in there, Lydia?" I asked. My voice sounded raspy, full of sleep and confusion. "It's 2 in the morning." She blinked rapidly, her eyes darting from my face to the dark stairs behind me. She was calculating. I have negotiated million-dollar contracts with crooked developers. I know the look of someone trying to construct a lie on the fly. "Lucas," she said, her voice dropping to a dramatic whisper. "He was moaning, Henry. He was in pain. I heard him over the monitor." I frowned. "I didn't hear anything." "Of course you didn't," she snapped, and suddenly the fear in her eyes was replaced by aggression. "You sleep like the dead, Henry. You take your heart pills, you take your sleeping aid, and you check out of this family. Someone has to be awake to take care of our son." Her words were like little needles. She knew exactly where to strike. She knew I felt guilty about my age. She knew I felt useless because I couldn't lift Lucas anymore, couldn't carry him to the bath like I used to. I was just massaging his legs. She continued smoothing her hair back, regaining her composure. "He gets cramps, severe cramps. I have to work the muscles or they atrophy even worse. It's exhausting work, Henry. Look at me. I'm sweating." It sounded plausible. It sounded like the Lydia I thought I knew. The devoted stepmother who had taken over Lucas's care when his own mother passed away decades ago. But my gut didn't settle. In construction, if the measurements are off by an inch, the roof collapses. Something here was off by a mile. "Why didn't you wake me?" I asked. "I could have helped." "You..." She let out a short, cruel laugh. "You would just get in the way. Your hands shake, Henry. You would hurt him." She tried to push past me to end the conversation, but in her haste, her elbow knocked against the doorframe. Something fell from the pocket of her robe. It hit the oak floor with a distinct plastic rattle and rolled to a stop against my slipper. A small amber pill bottle. We both froze. For a second, the only sound was the humming of the refrigerator downstairs. Lydia lunged for it, but I was faster. I might be 70, but I still have the reflexes of a man who has dodged falling beams. I bent down and snatched the bottle up. It wasn't the standard pharmacy bottle from Walgreens. There was no white label with doctor instructions. It was glass dark amber, with a label written in a language I didn't recognize. Maybe Spanish, maybe Portuguese. "Give me that," Lydia said. Her voice wasn't a request. It was a command. She held out her hand, her fingers trembling slightly. I held the bottle up to the dim light. The liquid inside was thick. "What is this, Lydia?" "This isn't his pain medication. Dr. Thorne prescribes oxycodone. This is..." "What is this?" "It's a herbal supplement," she said quickly, too quickly. "I ordered it online. It helps with circulation. Dr. Thorne said standard meds are ruining his liver. I'm trying to save him, Henry. Give it to me." She snatched the bottle from my hand with a force that surprised me. She shoved it deep into her pocket and pulled her robe tight around her body. "Go back to bed, Henry," she said, her tone icy. "You're tired. You're confused. You're seeing shadows where there aren't any. Let me do the heavy lifting. That's what I'm here for, isn't it?" She turned her back on me and walked into our bedroom, closing the door firmly. I stood alone in the hallway. I looked at the closed door of my bedroom, and then I looked at the closed door of my son's room. My instinct, the one that had kept me safe on construction sites for 40 years, was screaming at me. A supplement. At 2 a.m., sweating like she had run a marathon. And the way she wiped her hands, it wasn't the motion of someone who had been massaging a cramp. It was the motion of someone trying to remove a stain. I didn't go back to bed. I walked downstairs to the kitchen. I didn't turn on the lights. I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the island, staring out at the backyard pool that Lucas used to swim in before the accident. Lydia was lying. I didn't know what the lie was yet. I didn't know how big it was. But I knew that you don't hide herbal supplements like they are contraband. And you don't attack your husband for asking a simple question unless you are defending something dangerous. I thought about the money. The $4.8 million sitting in the trust fund. As Lucas's father and guardian, I controlled it, but Lydia had signatory powers for medical necessities. Tomorrow, I wouldn't go to the golf course. Tomorrow, I was going to the bank. I sat there in the dark until the sun came up, listening to the house settle, feeling the cold seep into my bones. I realized then that the foundation of my life was cracking. And if I didn't find the source of the rot, soon everything I built was going to come crashing down on top of my son. I needed eyes in that room. I needed to see what happened when I was asleep. Lydia said I was old. She said I slept like the dead. Well, she was about to find out that this old man still knew how to set a trap. The morning sun was streaming through the heavy curtains when I finally gathered the courage to walk into my son's room. I had spent hours sitting in the kitchen watching the steam rise from my black coffee, trying to shake the image of Lydia's frantic, sweating face from the night before. I needed to see Lucas. I needed to see him, light of day, without the shadows of 2 a.m. distorting reality. I pushed the door open slowly. The room smelled of antiseptic and lavender, a cloying mixture that Lydia insisted was soothing, but to me just smelled like a hospital waiting room. Lucas was lying there exactly as he had been for the last 2 years. My boy. My strong, brilliant boy. Before the accident, Lucas had been the chief structural engineer at my firm. He was 6'2", with shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of a skyscraper. He used to walk onto a job site, and the men would straighten up, not out of fear, but out of respect. He had a laugh that could rattle windows. Now looking at him, I felt a physical ache in the center of my chest. He was a shell. His skin was gray and translucent, stretched tight over cheekbones that jutted out like sharp rocks. His arms, once powerful enough to swing a sledgehammer all day, were wasted away to nothing but bone and tendon lying limp on the white sheets. His eyes were open, staring at the ceiling fan that spun in slow hypnotic circles. They were glazed, unfocused, like he was looking through the house, through the roof, and into some void I couldn't see. "Good morning, son," I said softly, pulling the chair up to his bedside. He didn't blink. He didn't turn his head. The only sound was the rhythmic beep of the monitors and the soft hiss of the oxygen concentrator. It was a symphony of machinery keeping him alive while the man inside seemed to be fading further away every day. I reached out and took his hand. It was cold. So cold. I rubbed his knuckles with my thumb, feeling the roughness of my own calloused skin against his fragile flesh. I remembered the day he graduated from engineering school. He had shaken my hand so hard I thought he'd crush it, grinning from ear to ear, telling me he was going to build things bigger and better than I ever dreamed. Now his hand felt like a dry leaf. "Lucas," I whispered, leaning closer. "Can you hear me? It's Dad." Nothing. Just that 1,000-yard stare. The doctors, the specialists Lydia had hired, they all said his neural pathways were recovering. They said the paralysis was physical, that his cognitive functions were intact. Locked-in syndrome, they called it. If that was true, if my son was really in there trapped behind a wall of silence, why did he look so empty? Why did he look more like a living corpse than a man on the mend? A dark thought crossed my mind, a suspicion planted by the strange herbal bottle I had found last night. Was he getting better, or was he being kept this way? I looked at the door to make sure Lydia wasn't there. Then with a trembling hand, I did something I hadn't done since he was a child, testing boundaries. I moved my hand to the inside of his forearm, to the tender skin near the elbow. I pinched him. Not hard enough to bruise, but hard enough to sting, hard enough to trigger a reflex. "Come on, Luke," I muttered. "Show me you're in there." His arm didn't jerk. His muscles didn't contract. Physically, he remained as still as a stone. But then I saw it. A single tear pooled in the corner of his left eye. It held there for a second, shimmering in the morning light, before sliding down his temple and disappearing into his hair. He felt it. He was in there. And he was crying. That tear hit me harder than a physical blow. It wasn't a reflex. It was sadness. It was pain. It was a plea. "Oh God, Lucas," I choked out, reaching to wipe the tear away. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "What do you think you're doing?" The voice cracked like a whip from the doorway. I jumped, dropping Lucas's hand. Lydia was standing there, holding a tray with a fresh towel and a bowl of water. Her face was a mask of fury. She crossed the room in 3 strides and shoved herself between me and the bed, effectively pushing me back. I saw that, Henry, she hissed, checking Lucas's arm as if I had burned him. I saw you pinching him. Have you lost your mind? He is not a piece of lumber you can test for rot. I was just trying to get a reaction, I stammered, feeling like a child caught stealing candy. He was staring at nothing. I just wanted to know if he could feel me. Of course he can feel you, she snapped, dipping a cloth into the water and dabbing Lucas's forehead aggressively. Dr. Kincaid was very specific about this. Overstimulation is dangerous for his neural recovery. You pinching him sends shockwaves through his system. Do you want him to have a seizure? Do you want to set his progress back months? Dr. Kincaid. That name again. The specialist she had insisted on bringing in 6 months ago because she said the hospital doctors were incompetent. I had never liked the man. He was too smooth, too polished, with cold eyes and a smile that didn't reach them. But Lydia treated his word like gospel. He's crying, Lydia, I said, pointing to the damp spot on the pillow. Look at him. He's crying. He's crying because you hurt him, she shot back, not even looking at Lucas's face. She turned on me, her eyes narrowing. You are useless in here, Henry. You disrupt his schedule. You upset him. You upset me. Look at you hovering like a ghost. Don't you have anything better to do? She smoothed the blanket over Lucas's chest with possessive, sharp movements. It's Tuesday, she said, her voice turning dismissive. Don't you have a tea time with Bob and the guys? Go play golf, Henry. Go hit a ball. Go drive your cart. Let me do the hard work. Let me take care of our son since you clearly don't have the stomach for it. She was kicking me out, just like she did every day, isolating me from him, making me feel like an intruder in my own son's life. Usually I would argue. I would try to stay. But today the image of that foreign pill bottle and the tear on Lucas's cheek made me realize that arguing was pointless. She had the control here. She had the medical jargon. She had the role of the martyr down to a science. If I wanted to save Lucas, I couldn't do it by fighting her in this room. I had to fight her where she didn't expect it. You're right, I said, forcing my voice to sound defeated. I let my shoulders slump. I'm just worried about him. I feel helpless. Lydia's expression softened instantly. It was a terrifying transformation. She went from fury to pity in a blink. She reached out and patted my cheek, her hand cold and damp. I know, honey, she cooed. It's hard for you. That's why I take the burden. I'm strong enough for both of us. Go on now. Go play golf. Get some fresh air. We'll be fine here. I looked at Lucas one last time. His eyes were dry now, staring blankly again. But I knew he was in there screaming. Okay, I said. I'll go. I walked out of the room, listening to Lydia start humming a tune as she busied herself around the bed. I walked down the stairs, my knees aching, my heart pounding a rhythm of rage I hadn't felt in years. I went into the garage and threw my golf clubs into the trunk of my Cadillac. I put on my golf cap. I opened the garage door loud enough for her to hear. I backed out of the driveway, waving at the neighbor who was walking her dog. To anyone watching, I was just a retired old man heading out for a day of leisure while his saintly wife cared for their invalid son. But as soon as I turned the corner and was out of sight of the house, I didn't turn toward the country club. I turned toward downtown. Lydia kept talking about Dr. Kincaid. She kept talking about expensive treatments, about specialized therapy, about the best care money could buy. She constantly reminded me of the burden, the cost, the sacrifice. Well, sacrifice costs money, and Lucas had a lot of it. $4.8 million in a trust fund that was supposed to last him the rest of his life. If Lydia was really spending her nights massaging his legs and her days administering expensive medicines, the money trail would prove it. But if that herbal bottle was what I thought it was, cheap, foreign, unregulated garbage, then where was the money for the real treatments going? I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I wasn't going to hit a ball into a hole today. I was going to the bank. and I was going to follow every single penny until I found out exactly what kind of care my wife was buying. The gut feeling that had started at 2 a.m. was now a siren blaring in my head. There was a smell to this situation, and it wasn't lavender. It was the smell of rot, and I was going to find it. I walked into the lobby of the First National Bank with the weight of the world pressing down on my shoulders. The air conditioning was set to a freezing temperature, which made the sweat on my back turn cold instantly. I was supposed to be on the fourth hole by now, putting for birdie, but instead, I was sitting in a leather chair across from Mr. Sterling, my private wealth manager. He looked nervous. He kept shuffling the papers on his mahogany desk, avoiding my eyes. I have known Sterling for 20 years. He handles the accounts for my construction business, and he set up the trust fund for Lucas immediately after the settlement check cleared. I asked him to pull the transaction history for the last 6 months. I wanted to see every single penny that had moved in or out of that account. Sterling cleared his throat and slid a thick stack of papers across the desk toward me. He muttered something about authorized users and standard protocols, but I was not listening. I was looking at the numbers. My eyes scanned the columns. April was normal. May was normal. But then came June. On June 3rd, there was a cash withdrawal for $9,500. On June 10th, another cash withdrawal for $9,500. June 17th, the same amount. June 24th, the same amount. I felt the blood drain from my face. I turned the page. July was the same. August. September. Every single Friday, like clockwork, someone walked into a branch and withdrew $9,500 in cash. I know why that specific number matters. In the construction business, we deal with cash flow all the time. Any cash transaction over $10,000 triggers a mandatory report to the IRS. It is a federal requirement to catch money launderers and criminals. Whoever was doing this knew exactly how to fly under the radar. They were bleeding the account dry just below the limit that would set off alarms. I looked at the memo line for these withdrawals. They were all noted as reimbursements for specialized physical therapy and imported nutritional supplements. I did the math in my head. $9,500 a week. That is $38,000 a month. In the last 6 months alone, nearly $250,000 had vanished from my son's care fund. $250,000 in cash. I looked up at Sterling. I asked him who authorized these withdrawals. He looked uncomfortable. He told me that as a co-trustee, my wife Lydia had full signatory power for medical expenses. He said she came in every Friday morning with invoices from Dr. Kincaid and the therapy center. She claimed they demanded cash payment for expedited service. I felt a wave of nausea. Expedited service. My son was lying in a bed wasting away, while his money was walking out the door in stacks of $100 bills. I asked Sterling for the phone on his desk. I told him I needed to verify a vendor. He pushed the device toward me and I dialed the number for the Neuro Recovery Center, the place where Lydia claimed Lucas was getting these expensive specialized treatments. A cheerful voice answered on the second ring. I identified myself as Henry, the father of Lucas. I tried to keep my voice steady. I told her I was reviewing our finances, and I wanted to confirm the monthly billing for the intensive therapy package my son was receiving. There was a pause on the line while she typed on her computer. Then she came back on the line. She told me that our account was fully paid up to date. She said the monthly fee for the premium in-home package was $2,000 flat. That included 3 visits a week and all necessary equipment rentals. $2,000 a month. I gripped the receiver so hard I thought the plastic might crack. Lydia was withdrawing $38,000 a month. The clinic was charging $2,000. That meant $36,000 a month was disappearing into thin air. That was nearly $9,000 a week going into someone else's pocket. I thanked the receptionist and hung up. The silence in the office was deafening. Sterling was watching me, his face pale. He asked if there was a problem. I stood up slowly. My knees popped. I felt every year of my 70 years in that moment. I told him there was no problem yet, but there would be. I told him to freeze the account immediately. No more withdrawals. Not a single cent. Not even for me. I told him if Lydia came in on Friday, he was to tell her the system was down for a security audit. He nodded furiously, writing notes on his pad. I walked out of the bank into the blinding afternoon sun. The world looked the same as it had an hour ago, but everything had changed. I was not just dealing with a neglectful wife. I was dealing with a thief. A calculating predator who was using my son's tragedy as her personal ATM. And the supplements, the bottle I found. If she wasn't spending the money on real medicine, what was she giving him? I got into my Cadillac, but I didn't turn toward home. I couldn't go back there yet. If I saw Lydia right now, I might lose control. I might do something that would land me in jail before I could save Lucas. I needed proof. I needed to see exactly what happened in that room when she thought no one was watching. I drove to the industrial side of town. Tucked between a bail bondsman and a liquor store was a shop called Tactical Surveillance Solutions. It was the kind of place suspicious husbands and paranoid business owners went. I walked in. The air smelled of ozone and cheap plastic. A young man with a nose ring looked up from behind the counter. I told him I needed a camera, not a big security system, something invisible. Something that could see in the dark and record audio. He looked at me, assessing my golf clothes and my gray hair. He probably thought I was trying to catch a nursing home aide stealing my silver. He reached into a glass cabinet and pulled out a box. It looked like a standard smoke detector. He explained that it had a 4K lens hidden in the sensor grate. It had night vision motion activation and a microphone sensitive enough to pick up a whisper. It connected to Wi-Fi and streamed directly to a secure app on a laptop or phone. It ran on a 10-year battery, so there were no wires to hide. It was perfect. It was exactly what I needed to catch the rats in my house. I paid cash. $300. A drop in the bucket compared to what Lydia had stolen. I took the box and walked back to my car. I sat in the driver's seat and opened the package. The device looked so innocent. Just a piece of white plastic. But this piece of plastic was going to be my witness. I checked my watch. It was 4 in the afternoon. I had told Lydia I was going on a fishing trip to Lake Tahoe with my old buddies. I needed to maintain that cover. If she thought I was suspicious, she would cover her tracks. She would stop the withdrawals. She might even hurt Lucas to keep him quiet. I had to play the part of the clueless old husband one last time. I had to let her think she had won so I could catch her with her guard down. I started the engine. Dong. My hands were steady on the wheel. The grief was still there, a heavy stone in my gut, but the anger was hotter. It sharpened my focus. I was a contractor. I knew how to build things, but I also knew how to demolish them. And I was about to bring the sledgehammer down on Lydia's house of lies. I drove toward the house, rehearsing my lines. I would be tired. I would be grateful for her care. I would be the perfect victim. And while she was sleeping, I would turn my son's room into a trap. Tonight, the camera would go up, and tomorrow I would see the truth. I pulled into the driveway just as the sun was beginning to dip below the tree line, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. I sat in the car for a moment, breathing in the smell of leather and old dust, trying to slow my heart rate. I had to be an actor now. I had to be the tired, confused old man she thought I was. If I showed even a flicker of the rage burning in my gut, she would know. And if she knew, the game would be over before it began. I walked into the kitchen carrying my golf bag. Lydia was at the counter chopping vegetables. The knife hit the cutting board with a sharp, rhythmic thud. She looked up and her eyes scanned my face, searching for something. "You are home late, Henry," she said. Her voice was light, but there was a tightness at the corners of her mouth. "Did you play 18 holes?" I set the bag down with a heavy sigh. letting my shoulders slump. No, I only played 9, I lied. My back was acting up again. I spent the rest of the afternoon sitting in the clubhouse just thinking. She stopped chopping. Thinking about what, about us, I said, walking over to the fridge to get a water. About Lucas. About how right you were this morning. I turned to face her, leaning against the counter for support. You were right, Lydia. I am useless here. I am just getting in the way. I see how hard you work, how tired you are, and I feel guilty just watching you. Her expression softened. It was the same look she gave me when I forgot where I put my glasses. Pity mixed with condescension. Oh, Henry, she said, walking over and placing a hand on my arm. Don't say that. You do what you can. It is just a difficult situation for everyone. I nodded, looking down at the floor. That is why I decided to take your advice. I need to clear my head. I called Bob and the guys. They are heading up to Lake Tahoe for a few days of fishing. They have an extra bunk in the cabin. I thought maybe I should go. Just for 3 days. Get some fresh air. Give you some space to work your magic with Lucas without me hovering over your shoulder. I watched her face closely. For a split second I saw it. A flash of pure, unadulterated joy. Her eyes widened and her lips parted in a genuine smile before she quickly wrestled her expression back into one of concern. Tahoe, she repeated. That sounds wonderful, Henry. But are you sure you are up for the drive? It is a long way. It is a long. I feel like the drive would do me good, I said. I need to see the mountains. I need to feel like a man again, not just a nursemaid who cannot lift a spoon. Well, if you think it will help, she said, squeezing my arm. I think you should go. You deserve a break. God knows you have earned it paying for all these treatments. I can handle things here. You know I can. I forced a smile. I know you can, Lydia. You are a saint. She practically pushed me toward the bedroom to pack. She was a whirlwind of helpfulness. She pulled out my old duffel bag. She folded my flannel shirts. She packed my thick wool socks. It was sickening to watch. She was packing my bags not because she loved me, but because she wanted me gone. Every shirt she folded was another hour she would have alone with the money and whatever secrets she was hiding in Lucas's room. Don't forget your heart medication, she said, tossing the bottle of beta blockers into the side pocket. We don't want you having an episode up there in the wilderness. The irony was bitter. She wanted me healthy enough to leave, but I wondered if she cared if I came back. I need to run to the pharmacy, she said, zipping up the bag. Lucas needs a refill on his muscle relaxers, and I want to get some special protein shakes for him before the store closes. You get loaded up. I will be back in 20 minutes to see you off. This was it. The window of opportunity. As soon as her car pulled out of the driveway, I moved. I didn't move like an old man. I moved like a contractor on a deadline. I grabbed the step stool from the pantry and ran up the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. My knees protested, but I ignored the pain. I went straight to Lucas's room. He was awake, staring at the ceiling. When I burst in, his eyes darted to me wide and fearful. It is okay, son, I whispered, dragging the stool to the center of the room. It is just Dad. I am fixing something. I climbed up the stool. My hands were shaking, not from age, but from adrenaline. I reached up and twisted the old smoke detector. It came off with a dusty click. I pulled the battery wire free. I tossed the old unit onto the bed and pulled the new spy camera from my pocket. It looked identical. The man at the shop said it was a standard casing. I connected the wire. A tiny, almost invisible red light blinked once, then vanished. I pulled out my phone and opened the app. Connecting. Connecting. My heart hammered against my ribs. If Lydia came back now, if she forgot her wallet, if she just decided to turn around. Online. The image appeared on my phone screen, crisp and clear in 4K resolution. I could see the top of Lucas's head. I could see the monitors. I could see the door. It was a perfect bird's-eye view of the entire room. I twisted the new unit into the bracket. It locked into place. I climbed down and folded the stool. I grabbed the old detector and shoved it deep into my pocket. I would throw it in a dumpster miles from here. I walked over to the bed. I leaned down and kissed Lucas on the forehead. "I am going away for a few days, Luke," I whispered. "But I am not really leaving. I will be watching. Every second. I am going to fix this. I promise." He blinked slowly. A single, slow blink. I hoped he understood. I ran back downstairs, put the stool away, and was sitting on the front porch with my duffel bag when Lydia's car pulled back in. I checked my watch. 17 minutes. I had done it. She got out of the car holding a pharmacy bag. She looked relieved to see me sitting there ready to go. "All set?" she asked, smiling. "All set," I said, standing up. She walked me to the Cadillac. She leaned in and gave me a kiss on the cheek. It felt cold. Dry. Like kissing a statue. "Drive safe, Henry," she said. "Catch a big one for me." "I will," I said. "Take care of our boy." I backed out of the driveway, watching her wave from the rearview mirror. She stood there until I turned the corner. I imagined her walking back into the house, locking the door, and letting out a sigh of relief. She thought the old dog was gone. She thought she had the run of the house. I didn't drive to Tahoe. I drove 10 miles west to the outskirts of town where the strip malls gave way to industrial parks and cheap motels. I pulled into the parking lot of the Starlight Inn. The neon sign was missing the S, so it just read Tarlight. It was a place for truckers and people who didn't want to be found. It cost $49 a night. I checked into room 112. It smelled of stale cigarettes and lemon cleaner. The carpet was sticky. I didn't care. I threw my bag on the bed and sat down at the small, wobbly desk. I opened my laptop. I connected to the motel's spotty Wi-Fi. I launched the surveillance program. The screen flickered to life. There was Lucas's room. It was exactly as I had left it. The sun was setting, casting long orange beams across the floor. It was quiet, peaceful. But I knew better. I knew that when the sun went down, the monsters would come out. I opened a bag of beef jerky and a bottle of water. This was my dinner. I settled into the hard plastic chair. I wasn't going to sleep. I wasn't going to look away. I was the guard dog now. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Lydia. "Miss you already, honey. Lucas is resting peacefully. Hope the traffic isn't too bad." I stared at the message. The lies came so easily to her now. They flowed from her thumbs like poison. "Traffic is fine," I typed back. "Just passing the city limits. Love you." I hit send and felt a shiver of disgust. I had to play the game. I had to let her think she was safe. On the screen, Lydia walked into the room. She was wearing her street clothes. She checked the monitors, adjusted Lucas's pillow, and then she smiled. It wasn't a mother's smile. It was a cold, calculating smirk. She looked directly at Lucas and said something I couldn't hear because I had the volume down. I turned it up. "Finally gone," she said, her voice tinny through the laptop speakers. "Just you and me now, vegetable. And soon we will have some company." She patted his cheek hard. Too hard. Then she turned and walked out, turning off the lights. The room plunged into darkness. The camera clicked softly as the night vision engaged. The screen turned into a grainy black and white. Lucas's eyes were glowing white orbs in the dark, staring up at the lens, staring up at me. I leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "I'm here, son," I said to the empty motel room. "I'm watching." The hunt had begun. The red digital numbers on the motel alarm clock flipped to 1 in the morning. I had been staring at the laptop screen for hours, my eyes burning, the taste of stale beef jerky lingering in my mouth. The room on the screen remained dark and silent, a grainy black and white image of my son sleeping. Or at least I hoped he was sleeping. I had almost convinced myself that maybe I was wrong. Maybe the paranoia of old age had finally gotten to me. Maybe Lydia was just an exhausted woman taking a break. But then the door handle on the screen turned. My breath hitched in my throat. I leaned closer to the screen, adjusting my glasses. The door pushed open, and light from the hallway flooded into the room, momentarily blinding the night vision sensor. When the camera adjusted, I saw her. It was Lydia, but it wasn't the wife I had said goodbye to this afternoon. It wasn't the woman who wore sensible cardigans and complained about her aching feet. This woman was wearing a black lace teddy, something sheer and expensive that I had never seen before. It was the kind of thing a woman wears for a lover, not to check on her sick son. In her right hand, she held a large crystal wine glass filled almost to the brim with dark liquid. She didn't tiptoe. She didn't check the monitors. She sashayed into the room with a terrifying confidence, kicking the door shut behind her with her heel. I watched confused as she walked over to the corner of the room where the high-end stereo system sat. I had installed that system myself. I had spent thousands on it because the music therapist said classical music stimulated brain activity. I had also soundproofed the room with high-density foam and triple-paned glass, wanting to ensure that the lawnmowers and street noise outside wouldn't disturb Lucas's rest. I built that sanctuary with my own hands to protect him. Now I watched my wife turn that protection into a weapon. She pressed a button on the console. Suddenly, the speakers on my laptop exploded with noise. It wasn't Mozart. It wasn't Bach. It was a wall of distorted guitars and screaming vocals, heavy metal, aggressive, chaotic, and loud. Even through the tiny laptop speakers, it was jarring. I could only imagine what it sounded like in that sealed room. It must have been deafening. On the bed, Lucas jerked. His eyes flew open wide with terror. His chest heaved as he tried to take a breath, but the paralysis kept him pinned. He couldn't cover his ears. He couldn't scream. He was trapped in a box of noise. Lydia took a long sip of her wine, swaying her hips to the aggressive rhythm. She walked over to the bed looming over him. The night vision made her eyes look like two black pits. She placed the cold wine glass on his bare chest, letting the condensation drip onto his skin. He flinched, his eyes darting frantically from her face to the glass. "Wake up!" she shouted over the music. I had to turn the volume down on my laptop. Her voice was so shrill. "Wake up, you useless vegetable! You think you can sleep while I'm bored? You think you can just lie there and cost money while I have to play the grieving mother?" She leaned down, her face inches from his. I could see the spittle flying from her mouth as she screamed. "Look at you," she spat. $4.8 million wrapped in skin and bones. That is all you are, Lucas. You are just a checkbook that breathes. And you are so boring. God, you are boring. My hands were shaking so violently, I knocked my water bottle off the desk. It hit the floor with a thud, but I didn't look down. I couldn't look away. I felt a rage so pure, so hot, it felt like I was swallowing molten lead. That was my son. That was the boy I taught to ride a bike. That was the man who built bridges. And she was torturing him. Lydia set the wine glass on the nightstand and pulled the sheet down, exposing Lucas's thin, atrophied arms. "Did you miss me?" she cooed, her voice mocking. "Did you miss Mommy's touch? Henry thinks I come in here to massage you. He thinks I'm a saint. Shall we give him what he paid for?" She reached out with her manicured nails. I thought she was going to scratch him, but she did something worse. She found the tender, soft skin on the inside of his upper arm, the place where the skin is thin and sensitive. She grabbed a small pinch of flesh between her thumb and forefinger and twisted. It was a small movement, precise, cruel. Lucas's mouth opened in a silent scream. His neck muscles strained, cords of tendon standing out against his gray skin. His eyes watered instantly, tears spilling over his lashes and running into his ears. "Does that hurt?" she asked, laughing. She moved her hand to his inner thigh and pinched again, harder this time. "I bet that hurts. But you can't tell anyone, can you? You can't go running to Daddy. You can't even lift a finger to stop me. I stood up in the motel room, gripping the edges of the cheap desk until the wood creaked. I wanted to smash the screen. I wanted to drive back there right now and tear her apart with my bare hands. I was screaming at the laptop vile words, curses I hadn't used in 30 years. "Stop it!" I yelled at the empty room. "Stop it, you witch!" But she couldn't hear me. She just kept going. She moved around the bed like a predator, finding new spots to pinch, new ways to inflict pain that wouldn't leave large bruises, just deep, aching soreness. She slapped his cheek lightly, rhythmically, keeping time with the heavy metal drums. "You ruin everything," she muttered, her face twisting into a snarl. "You were supposed to die in that crash. We would have had the money and none of the work. But no, you had to survive. You had to hang on. So now I have to be the nurse. I have to wipe your chin. I have to pretend I care." She grabbed his face, squeezing his jaw so hard his cheeks turned white. "But don't worry, Lucas," she whispered, her voice dropping to a sinister hiss that the microphone barely picked up over the music. "I'm not the only one who's tired of waiting." Lucas was sobbing now, silent, heaving sobs that shook his frail frame. He looked broken. He looked like an animal caught in a trap, waiting for the hunter to finish him off. I felt like I was having a heart attack. My chest was tight, my left arm numb. I fumbled for my beta blockers, dry, swallowing a pill. I couldn't die. Not now. I had to live long enough to kill her. I had to live long enough to save him. Lydia stepped back, picking up her wineglass again. She finished it in one long gulp. She looked at her watch, a diamond-encrusted piece I had bought her for our anniversary. "Stop crying," she snapped. "You look pathetic. And dry your eyes. We have company coming." She walked over to the stereo and turned the volume down, not off, just down to a low, menacing thrum. The sudden drop in noise was startling. "You're lucky," she said, looking at the door. "My fun is over for tonight. The real professional is on his way." She turned back to Lucas and smoothed his hair back, a gesture that looked affectionate but made Lucas flinch violently. "We are almost out of the fun medicine," she said, tapping a fingernail against her teeth. "But don't you worry. The doctor is coming. He's bringing a fresh supply. And tonight he's going to give you a special shot. Something to make sure you stay nice and quiet while we celebrate." My blood ran cold. The doctor. So she wasn't alone. There was someone else involved in this nightmare. Someone with access to drugs. Someone who knew exactly what was happening in this house and was helping her do it. I watched as she walked to the window, peering out through the blinds, looking for headlights in the driveway. She looked excited. She looked like a woman waiting for a date. I sat back down, my hands trembling as I reached for my phone. I needed to record this. I needed to make sure the stream was saving to the cloud. I checked the connection. It was solid. "Who are you?" I whispered, staring at the woman on the screen. "Who is coming to my house?" I didn't have to wait long to find out. And when I saw who walked through that door, the rage I felt toward Lydia would seem like a gentle breeze compared to the hurricane that was about to hit. I wasn't just dealing with an abusive wife. I was dealing with a conspiracy. And I knew with absolute certainty that if I didn't act perfectly, my son wasn't going to survive the night. 30 minutes dragged by like 30 years. On the screen, Lydia paced the room, checking her reflection in the mirror, fixing her hair. She wasn't acting like a mother worried about her son's health. She was acting like a teenager, waiting for her boyfriend to climb through the window. She kept glancing at the digital clock on the bedside table, tapping her foot impatiently against the hardwood floor. Then the back door clicked. I didn't hear the doorbell, which meant she had left it unlocked. A shadow moved across the hallway, and a man stepped into the frame. It was Dr. Kincaid. I recognized him instantly, though he wasn't wearing the pristine white coat he always wore when I was around. He was wearing a leather jacket and expensive jeans, carrying a black medical bag that looked more like a briefcase. He didn't look like a medical professional coming for an emergency house call. He looked like a predator entering his territory. Finally, Lydia breathed, her voice dripping with relief and something else lust. She threw herself at him. I watched my stomach churning as my wife wrapped her arms around the man she claimed was saving our son's life. They didn't speak. They didn't sanitize their hands. They kissed. A long, wet, passionate kiss right there at the foot of Lucas's bed. Kincaid dropped his bag and grabbed her waist, pulling her close with a familiarity that made my skin crawl. "Did you miss me?" he murmured, pulling back just enough to look at her. "You have no idea," Lydia whispered. "The old man is gone. He went to Tahoe. We have the house to ourselves for 3 whole days." "Perfect." Kincaid grinned, a wolfish baring of teeth. "Then we can really turn up the heat." They laughed. They actually laughed. I sat in that motel room gripping the edge of the desk until my knuckles turned white. My vision blurred with red rage. This wasn't just malpractice. This wasn't just theft. This was adultery of the vilest kind, performed over the broken body of my son. Every dollar I had signed, over every expedited fee, every cash withdrawal, it wasn't for therapy. It was for this. It was to pay for her gigolo. It was to fund their sick little game. They separated, and Kincaid turned his attention to Lucas. The smile vanished from his face, replaced by a cold, clinical sneer. He walked over to the bed, looking down at my son, not as a patient, but as a broken appliance. "How is our golden goose doing tonight?" Kincaid asked, snapping a pair of latex gloves onto his hands. The sound was loud in the quiet room. "He was crying earlier," Lydia said, leaning against the dresser and pouring herself another glass of wine. "Henry pinched him. Can you believe that the old fool actually tried to check for reflexes?" "That is dangerous," Kincaid muttered, opening his black bag. "If he starts getting sensation back, he starts getting ideas. We can't have him waking up Lydia. If he wakes up, the money stops. And if the money stops, I stop coming over." He reached into the bag and pulled out a small glass vial. Even through the digital feed, the color was unmistakable. It wasn't clear medicine. It wasn't the amber liquid I had found earlier. It was a bright neon green, almost glowing in the dim light of the bedside lamp. It looked toxic. It looked like antifreeze. "What is that?" Lydia asked, swirling her wine. "A new cocktail," Kincaid said, holding the vial up to the light. "I had to mix it myself. The standard sedatives are getting too weak. His tolerance is building up. This is special. It's a veterinary tranquilizer mixed with a little something to scramble the synaptic pathways." My heart stopped. Veterinary tranquilizer. Horse medicine. Kincaid filled a syringe, tapping the side to clear the air bubbles. The needle looked enormous. "This will keep him in the vegetable aisle for at least another 12 hours. Kincaid said, his voice flat and devoid of humanity. "It essentially melts the connections in the frontal lobe temporarily. He won't be able to think, let alone move. It turns his brain into mush." "Do it," Lydia said, taking a sip of wine. "I don't want him moaning all night while we are busy." I watched in horror as Kincaid grabbed Lucas's arm. He didn't search for a vein gently. He jabbed the needle in with brutal efficiency. Lucas's eyes widened, the pupils blowing out until they were almost entirely black. His body gave a single violent shudder, a spasm of pure chemical shock, and then he went limp. His eyes stayed open, but the light behind them vanished. He looked dead. "There," Kincaid said, tossing the empty syringe back into his bag. "Lights out. Now about that payment." Lydia walked over to my closet, and pulled out a shoebox. She handed him a stack of cash. My cash. Lucas's trust fund money. 5,000, she said, just like we agreed. "You are a generous woman, Lydia," Kincaid said, pocketing the money without counting it. "Now let's go to the master bedroom. I've always hated this hospital smell. They walked out, leaving the door open, leaving the light on, leaving my son floating in a chemical void induced by a man who shouldn't be allowed near a dog, let alone a human being. I sat there for a full minute, unable to breathe, unable to think. The image of that neon green fluid entering my son's veins was burned into my retinas. They were killing him. Maybe not stopping his heart, but they were killing his mind. They were systematically destroying his recovery to keep him helpless, to keep the money flowing. I looked at the clock. It was 3 a.m. I didn't care what time it was. I grabbed my phone. My hands were shaking so bad, I had to use voice commands to dial. Call Hartman. Robert Hartman was my personal lawyer. Not the family lawyer who handled the trust, Sterling handled the money, but Hartman handled the dirty work. He was a shark in a cheap suit, the kind of guy you hire when you need to bury a contractor who tried to cheat you on materials. He didn't sleep. He lived on caffeine and litigation. The phone rang 4 times. Henry. Hartman's voice was groggy rough with sleep. It's 3 a.m. Unless the police are at your door, this better be good. I need you to open your email, I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, cold, metallic, dead. I am sending you a video file right now. Henry, what is going on? Just open it, Robert, and turn the volume up. I heard the rustle of sheets, the click of a lamp, the tapping of keys, then silence. For a long time there was just silence on the other end of the line. Then I heard a sharp intake of breath. Good God, Hartman whispered. Is that Kincaid? Yes. That is Dr. Kincaid, and that is my wife. What did he just inject him with? Hartman asked, his lawyer's voice sharpening, shaking off the sleep. That didn't look like any FDA-approved medication I have ever seen. He said it was a veterinary tranquilizer, I told him. He said it melts the brain. Robert? I need you to find out everything about that man. I want to know where he got his license. I want to know who he owes money to. I want to know what that green filth is. And I want to know it by sunrise. Henry, Hartman said, if this is real, this is attempted murder. This is assault with a deadly weapon. We need to call the police. Not yet, I said. If the police show up now, Kincaid claims it's an experimental treatment. Lydia claims I'm a senile old man spying on them. They flush the drugs. They hide the money. No, I need to know exactly what I am dealing with. I need to know how deep the rot goes. I can have a private investigator on Kincaid in an hour. Hartman said, the shark in him waking up. I have a guy who used to work narcotics. If that drug is on the street, he will know what it is. But Henry, you cannot go back there. Not tonight. If you walk in on them. I'm not going back tonight, I said, staring at the screen where my son lay motionless. I'm going to let them think they are safe. I'm going to let them dig their own graves a little deeper. But Robert, yeah, Henry, when I do go back, I said, reaching into my bag and feeling the cold steel of my Colt 1911. I'm going to need you to have a cleanup crew ready, because I am going to tear my house down. I'll get to work, Hartman said. Check your email in 4 hours. I hung up the phone. On the screen, the room was empty, save for Lucas. The neon green poison was coursing through his veins, stealing his mind. But I was awake now. The old man was gone. The contractor was here. And I was about to start the demolition. The sun was still hours away, but for me, the darkness had just begun, and I wasn't going to blink until I saw the dawn. I sat in the leather chair in Robert Hartman's office, staring at a cup of black coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. The sun was up, but I hadn't seen it rise. I had driven straight from the motel to Robert's office parking lot, waiting for him to unlock the doors at 6 a.m. I looked like a wreck. My golf clothes were wrinkled, my eyes were red, and I hadn't shaved. But I didn't care. I felt like a man who had just watched his house burn down and was now sifting through the ashes looking for the arsonist's matchbook. Robert walked in carrying a thick manila folder. He didn't look much better than I did. His tie was loosened, and he had the gray pallor of a man who had spent the night digging through digital garbage. He sat down heavily across from me and didn't open the folder immediately. He just looked at me with a mixture of pity and professional resolve. "Henry," he said, his voice gravelly, "you need to prepare yourself. What we found is not just bad. It is evil." I leaned forward, gripping the arms of the chair. "Just tell me, Robert, is he a doctor or not?" Robert flipped the folder open. He slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a photocopy of a medical board ruling from 5 years ago. "Technically, yes, he was a doctor," Robert said, tapping the paper. "But the state of California revoked his license permanently 5 years ago. He was running a pill mill, Henry. He was writing prescriptions for opioids to anyone with cash. When the feds started sniffing around, he threw his partners under the bus and vanished. He has been practicing medicine without a license in 3 different states since then." I stared at the mugshot on the paper. It was younger, but it was him. The same cold, arrogant eyes. "But why is he doing this to Lucas?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Why the torture? Why not just kill him and take the money?" "Because a dead patient doesn't pay monthly dividends," Robert said, sliding another document across. "This is a credit report from the darker corners of the financial world. Your Dr. Kincaid has a gambling problem, Henry. A massive one. He owes $800,000 to a syndicate in Las Vegas. These are not the kind of people who send debt collectors. They send guys with baseball bats." It clicked. The pieces of the foundation snapped into place. Lydia wasn't just paying for a lover. She was paying off his debts. She was bleeding my son dry to save a man who would probably sell her out the moment the money ran out. "He needs a steady income stream," Robert continued. "If Lucas dies, the trust fund gets locked up in probate. The courts get involved. The money stops flowing for months, maybe years. But as long as Lucas is alive and sick, Lydia can withdraw cash for medical expenses. Kincaid keeps him alive but helpless. It is the perfect parasitic relationship." I felt sick. Physically sick. My son was being kept as a biological ATM machine. "What about the green stuff?" I asked, pointing to the screenshot I had printed out from the video feed. "The stuff he injected him with." Robert's face hardened. He pulled out a report from a toxicology lab. "I sent the video to my guy. He recognized the packaging immediately. It is not a prescription drug, Henry. It is a street cocktail. They call it the Green Void." He took a deep breath before continuing. "It is a high-concentration mixture of ketamine, which is a dissociative anesthetic, and xylazine, which is a veterinary sedative used for horses." "Horse tranquilizer," I whispered, remembering Kincaid's words. "It is worse than that," Robert said. "The mix is designed to induce total paralysis. It severs the connection between the brain and the muscles. But here is the nightmare, Henry. It doesn't stop the pain receptors. It actually amplifies them. It causes hallucinations, terrifying ones." I stood up so fast the chair flew back and hit the wall. "You mean," I stammered, my hands shaking uncontrollably. "You mean he is awake, he can feel it?" Robert nodded slowly, looking down at his desk. "He is locked in, Henry. His body is dead weight, but his mind is active. He feels every pinch, every slap, every needle. And because of the hallucinogens, he is probably living in a waking nightmare every second of every day. He wants to scream, but he can't even blink." I walked to the window and pressed my forehead against the cool glass. I looked down at the street below, watching the cars move like ants. I thought about Lucas lying in that bed. I thought about the tear I saw yesterday. That wasn't just sadness. It was agony. He was begging me to help him. He was trapped in a hell created by his own mother, and I had gone to play golf. "I am going to kill him," I said quietly. "I am going to go back there and I am going to put a bullet in his head. Robert didn't try to stop me. He didn't give me the lawyer speech about homicide charges. He just waited a moment, and then spoke softly. If you do that, Henry, you go to prison. And if you go to prison, who takes care of Lucas? Who makes sure Lydia doesn't get guardianship when the dust settles? He was right. Damn him, he was right. I took a deep breath, forcing the red haze of rage to recede just enough to think clearly. I was a builder. You don't knock down a wall until you know what is holding up the ceiling. My phone buzzed in my pocket. The sound was loud in the quiet office. I pulled it out. A text message notification flashed on the screen. It was from Lydia. I opened it. Hey honey, the text read, followed by a heart emoji. Are you catching any big ones up there? It is so quiet here without you. Lucas misses you terribly. Hope you are relaxing. Love you. I stared at the words. The audacity. The sheer evil of it. She was probably lying in bed next to that monster right now, typing this message with one hand while he planned how to spend my son's money. Lucas misses you. She used his name. She used his suffering as a prop in her little play. I felt the bile rise in my throat. I rushed to the small trash can in the corner of the office and retched. My stomach was empty, but my body tried to purge the disgust anyway. Robert handed me a tissue. I wiped my mouth and stood up straight. The weakness was gone. In its place was something cold and hard like steel-reinforced concrete. I am going back, Robert? I said, my voice steady. Not yet, Robert warned. We need the police involved. We need a warrant. No, I said. If the police show up, Kincaid flushes the drugs. He claims he is a consultant. Lydia plays the confused wife. It becomes a he said, she said mess, and my son stays in that bed for weeks while lawyers argue. I need to catch them in the act. I need a confession, and I need to make sure they never touch him again. I looked at the text message one more time. Catching any big ones, yeah, Lydia, I thought. I am catching the biggest ones of my life. I typed a reply, my thumbs moving mechanically. Fishing is great, I wrote. Caught a huge trout, thinking about staying an extra day. The air is good for my heart. Kiss Lucas for me. I hit send. I turned to Robert. I need you to have a team ready. I want private security and I want your contact at the police department on speed dial. But nobody moves until I give the signal. What are you going to do, Henry? Robert asked, standing up. I checked the weight of the Colt 1911 in my waistband. I am going home early, I said, and I am going to serve them a cup of coffee they will never forget. I walked out of the office, leaving the folder on the desk. The evidence was damning, but it was just paper. I needed more than paper. I needed justice, and justice was waiting for me back at the house, sitting in a bottle of poison that they thought was meant for me. The drive back to the motel was a blur. I packed my bag. I checked the camera feed one last time. The room was empty. Sunlight streamed in, hitting the bed where my son lay motionless, trapped in his green nightmare. Hold on, Lucas, I whispered. Daddy is coming, and I am bringing the sledgehammer. I got into my car and turned the engine over. It was time to go fishing. Back in the motel room, the air conditioner rattled with a dying wheeze, but I barely heard it. My entire world had narrowed down to the 14-inch screen of my laptop. It was the second night of my surveillance. The box of beef jerky was empty, and the coffee in my styrofoam cup had turned into a sludge that tasted like battery acid. I hadn't slept in 36 hours. My eyes felt like they were filled with sand, but I didn't dare blink. On the screen, the digital clock in Lucas's room read 2:45 in the morning. The room was dark, illuminated only by the faint glow of the medical monitors. For a moment, I thought maybe tonight would be quiet. Maybe they were taking a break. Maybe they were just sleeping like normal human beings. Then the door opened. Lydia walked in first. She wasn't wearing the black lace teddy this time. She was wearing her silk robe tied tightly around her waist. She looked agitated. Her movements were jerky and sharp. She paced back and forth at the foot of Lucas's bed, wringing her hands the same way she had the night I caught her. Dr. Kincaid followed her in. He looked annoyed. He was running a hand through his hair, and his shirt was untucked. "Will you stop pacing, Lydia?" he hissed. "You are going to wear a hole in the floor." "I can't help it," she snapped, turning to face him. "I have a bad feeling, a really bad feeling." "About what?" Kincaid asked, leaning against the dresser and crossing his arms. "The old man is in Tahoe. He is probably halfway through a case of beer by now, sleeping like a baby. We have the run of the place." "Do we?" Lydia asked, her voice rising in pitch. Because before he left, he was acting strange. He wasn't just tired. He was watchful. And Sterling called me today from the bank. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had told Sterling to freeze the account, but I hadn't expected him to call her so soon. "What did he say?" Kincaid asked, straightening up. "He said there was a security audit," Lydia said. "He said the account is frozen temporarily. But he sounded weird, evasive, and Henry went to the bank yesterday. The teller mentioned she saw his Cadillac in the lot." Kincaid swore softly. "You said he was playing golf." "He told me he was playing golf," Lydia said, her voice trembling. "But if he went to the bank, if he saw the withdrawals, Kincaid, he knows. He knows about the money." "Knowing about the money is one thing," Kincaid said dismissively. "He can't prove where it went. We have invoices. We have paperwork. I can paper over the cracks." "It's not just the money," she whispered, looking down at Lucas, who was lying motionless under the influence of the green poison. "If he starts digging into the accounts, he will start digging into the treatments. He is a contractor, Kincaid. He looks for structural flaws. If he finds out what we are doing to him," she pointed a shaking finger at our son, "he will kill us," she finished. "Henry looks like a soft old man, but you don't know him like I do. He has a temper. If he finds out we are hurting Lucas, he will tear this house down around our ears." Kincaid stared at her for a long moment. Then a cold, flat look entered his eyes. It was the look of a man who had backed himself into a corner and was deciding which way to shoot his way out. "Then we don't let him find out," Kincaid said calmly. "We accelerate the timeline." "What do you mean?" Lydia asked, stopping her pacing. "Plan B," Kincaid said. "We talked about this. We said, if the situation became untenable, we would initiate the exit strategy." "I thought you meant running," Lydia said, her voice barely audible. "I thought you meant taking the cash and going to Mexico." "And live on what?" Kincaid sneered. "We have maybe 50 grand in cash stashed in the safe. That lasts 6 months. No, Lydia. We need the rest of the trust fund. And to get the rest of the trust fund without Henry asking questions, Henry needs to not be around to ask them." I felt the blood drain from my face, leaving me cold and numb. I sat frozen in that motel chair, listening to them discuss my murder as if they were planning a renovation. Kincaid walked over to his black medical bag. He rummaged around for a moment and pulled out a small, clear vial. It didn't have a label. The liquid inside was clear, like water. "What is that?" Lydia asked, stepping back. "Potassium chloride," Kincaid said, holding the vial up to the dim light. "High concentration." "What does it do?" "It stops the heart," he said simply. "Instantly. It disrupts the electrical signals. It looks exactly like a massive myocardial infarction. A heart attack." Lydia put a hand to her mouth. You want to do it now?" "He's in Tahoe." "No," Kincaid said, shaking his head. "We can't do it there. Too messy. Too many questions. We do it when he comes back. He said the drive is hard on him, right? He said he was tired. When he gets home on Friday, you will be the loving wife. You will welcome him back. You will sit him down in his favorite recliner. He walked over to her and pressed the vial into her hand. You make him a cup of coffee, Kincaid said, his voice low and seductive. He loves your coffee, right? You put this in, all of it. Within 5 minutes, he will complain of chest pains. Within 10, he will be gone. By the time the paramedics arrive, it will just look like a tragedy. A 70-year-old man with a history of hypertension dies after a stressful trip. No autopsy, no investigation. Just a grieving widow and a sole surviving guardian of a $4.8 million trust. I stared at the screen. My wife was holding my death in her hand. She looked at the vial, and then she looked at Kincaid. I waited for her to throw it away. I waited for her to scream, to slap him, to call the police. I waited for the woman I had slept beside for 35 years to show up. But she didn't. She closed her fingers around the vial. Are you sure it won't show up in a toxicology report? She asked. Potassium is a naturally occurring element in the body, Kincaid assured her. Unless they are looking for it specifically, they won't find it. And why would they look? He is an old man who forgets to take his beta blockers. It is a perfect death. Okay, she whispered. Okay. Friday, when he gets home. Good girl, Kincaid said, kissing her forehead. Now let's go back to bed. We have a lot of planning to do. They left the room. The door clicked shut. The silence in the motel room was absolute. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears like a roaring river. I looked down at my hands. They were steady. I expected them to be shaking, but they were rock steady. They were going to kill me. They weren't just stealing from me. They weren't just cheating on me. They were going to murder me in my own kitchen with a cup of coffee. I reached out and closed the laptop. The screen went black, cutting off the image of my son lying in the dark. I didn't need to see any more. I had seen the face of the devil, and she was wearing my wife's robe. I stood up and walked over to my duffel bag. I unzipped the side pocket. I pushed aside the bottle of heart pills, the pills they were counting on, to explain my death, and reached deeper. My fingers brushed against cold steel. I pulled out the Colt 1911. It was an old gun, a relic from my father. I had kept it cleaned and oiled for 40 years, hoping I would never have to use it. It was heavy in my hand, a solid, undeniable weight. I sat on the edge of the bed and checked the magazine. It was full. 7 rounds of hollow point ammunition. I pulled the slide back, chambering around. The mechanical clack-clack sound was loud in the small room. I wasn't going to call the police. The police would want statements. They would want to file reports. They would knock on the door, and Kincaid would flush the poison down the toilet and lawyer up. They would drag this out for months while my son rotted in that bed. No. I wasn't waiting for Friday. I wasn't waiting for them to set the stage for my funeral. I checked my watch. It was 4 a.m. I'm coming home early, Lydia, I said to the empty room. I put the gun into the waistband of my trousers, covering it with my flannel shirt. I grabbed my car keys. I didn't bother packing the rest of my clothes. I didn't bother checking out. I walked out into this cool night air. The parking lot was empty. The stars were fading overhead. I got into my Cadillac and started the engine. The rumble of the V8 felt like a growl. I wasn't a contractor anymore. I wasn't a husband. I was a father who had one job left to do. I put the car in gear and pulled out onto the highway. The road to Tahoe was north. I turned south, toward home, toward the rot, toward the end of everything. The sun was bleeding into the horizon when I turned onto my street. The sky was a bruised purple, casting long, dying shadows across the neighborhood. It was Wednesday evening. I wasn't supposed to be back until Friday. I parked the Cadillac in the driveway, turning off the engine. The silence inside the car was heavy. I sat there for a moment, feeling the weight of the Colt 1911 against my lower back. It was cold and hard, a reminder of the reality I was about to step into. I checked my face in the rearview mirror. I looked tired. I didn't have to act that part. The last 2 days had aged me 10 years, but behind the fatigue my eyes were sharp. They were the eyes of a man who was done being the victim. I opened the car door and stepped out, making sure to drag my left leg slightly. I needed to sell the image of the frail, broken old man. I needed Lydia to see a target, not a threat. I hunched my shoulders, grabbed my duffel bag, and shuffled up the walkway. The front door was unlocked. It always was. We lived in a safe neighborhood, or so we thought. The real danger had been inside the house all along. I pushed the door open. The house smelled of lemon polish and something cooking, maybe a roast. It was the smell of a happy home. It made my stomach churn. "Lydia?" I called out, letting my voice crack a little. "I'm home." There was a crash from the kitchen, the sound of a pan hitting the floor. A second later, Lydia appeared in the hallway. She was wearing an apron over her clothes, her hair perfectly coiffed. When she saw me, her face went through a kaleidoscope of emotions. First, sheer terror. Her eyes went wide, her mouth dropped open. Then confusion, and finally a terrifying mask of concern settled over her features. "Henry!" she exclaimed, rushing toward me. "Oh my God, Henry, your back's what happened? Is everything okay?" She reached me and grabbed my arms, her grip tight. I could feel her heart pounding against my chest as she hugged me. It wasn't a hug of relief. It was a hug of panic. She was checking to see if I was real, if I was alone. My back. I groaned, leaning heavily on her. The drive was too much, Lydia. I got about halfway to the lake, and my sciatica flared up. I couldn't sit in the car anymore. I had to turn around. "I just want my own bed." I felt her relax slightly. The story fit. It fit the narrative she had built in her head about me being weak and falling apart. "Oh, you poor thing," she cooed, guiding me toward the kitchen. "I told you that drive was too long. You never listened to me. Come on, come sit down. You look pale." She led me to the kitchen table. It was set for one. A bottle of red wine was breathing on the counter. 2 glasses were drying in the rack. She had been expecting Kincaid. I pretended not to notice. I slumped into my chair, letting out a long, ragged breath. "I'm sorry to ruin your evening," I said, rubbing my face. "I know you were looking forward to some quiet time." "Don't be silly," she said, turning away from me quickly. "You are my husband. Your health is the only thing that matters." She walked to the counter. Her back was to me, but I could see her reflection in the darkened glass of the oven door. She was moving fast. Her hands were shaking. "You need something to warm you up," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You're shivering, Henry. Let me make you some coffee. I just bought a new bag of those Arabica beans you love." Coffee. The word hung in the air like a gunshot. I remembered the conversation from the motel room. Potassium chloride. Stops the heart instantly. Looks like a heart attack. "That sounds good," I said, watching her reflection. "Black, please." "Of course," she said. I watched as she reached into her apron pocket. It was a smooth, practiced motion. She pulled out a small, clear vial. She didn't hesitate. She poured the entire contents into the mug on the counter. She didn't stir it. She just poured the hot coffee over it, the steam rising up to mask the deed. She wasn't saving it for Friday. She was improvising. I was here now. I was vulnerable. Why wait? She saw a chance to end it tonight, to get the money to clear the board for her and Kincaid. I gripped the edge of the table under the tablecloth. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but I forced my breathing to remain shallow and wheezy. She turned around, the mug in her hands. She was smiling. It was the most terrifying smile I had ever seen. It was sweet, loving, and lethal. "Here you go, darling," she said, placing the mug in front of me. "Drink this. It will make you feel so much better. It will take all the pain away." The steam curled up into my face. It smelled rich and dark. It smelled like death. I looked up at her. She was standing right next to me, her hand resting on my shoulder. She was waiting. She was watching me with the intensity of a vulture waiting for a wounded animal to take its last breath. "Thank you, Lydia," I said. "You always know just what I need." I reached out with my right hand. My fingers trembled. I wasn't faking that. The adrenaline was coursing through my system so fast, I felt like I was vibrating. I wrapped my fingers around the warm ceramic handle. I lifted the cup. Lydia held her breath. I could hear the tiny intake of air. Her eyes were locked on the rim of the cup. She was already spending the money. She was already planning the funeral. She was probably wondering if she could get Kincaid over here to certify the death before the coffee got cold. I brought the cup to my lips. I let the steam hit my nose. "You know," I said, pausing with the cup just inches from my mouth, "I was thinking on the drive back about Lucas." Lydia froze. "What about him?" "I was thinking about how much he used to love my coffee," I said, staring into the black liquid. "Before the accident. He used to say I made the best pot in the county." "Henry, drink your coffee?" she said, her voice sharpening with impatience. "It's getting cold." "Right," I said. "Right." I tilted the cup. Lydia leaned in closer. And then I let go. I didn't just drop it. I spasmed. I jerked my hand as if a sudden jolt of pain had shot through my arm. The mug slipped from my fingers. It hit the edge of the table and shattered. The sound was explosive in the quiet kitchen. Shards of ceramic flew everywhere. The black liquid splashed across the table, dripping onto the floor, soaking the rug. The poison spread out in a dark, steaming puddle. "Oh!" I cried out, clutching my hand to my chest. "Oh, damn it! My hand, it just cramped up." Lydia stared at the mess on the floor. Her face drained of all color. She looked from the broken shards to me, her eyes wide with shock and fury. The weapon was destroyed. The plan was ruined. For a second I thought she was going to scream. I thought she was going to lunge across the table and try to strangle me. "You clumsy old fool," she whispered, the mask slipping completely. "What?" I asked, looking up at her with wide, innocent eyes. "What did you say, Lydia?" She blinked physically, shaking herself, trying to pull the loving wife persona back over her rage. It was like watching a snake shed its skin in reverse. I said, "Oh, you poor fool," she stammered, her voice high and tight. "Look at you. You're shaking. You're in no condition to be holding anything." She grabbed a roll of paper towels and dropped to her knees, frantically wiping up the spill. She wasn't cleaning. She was destroying evidence. She knew that if anyone tested that liquid, she was done. She was scrubbing the floor with a desperation that bordered on mania. "I'm so sorry," I said, watching her scrub. "I'm just so useless lately. I wasted your coffee." "It's fine, Henry," she snapped from the floor, not looking up. "It's just coffee. I can make another one. I have plenty." She stood up, her chest heaving. She threw the soaked paper towels into the trash compactor and hit the button. The machine whirred, crushing the evidence into a dense block. "Sit there," she commanded. "Don't move. I'll make another cup, a fresh one, and I'll put it in a plastic travel mug this time so you can't drop it." She turned back to the counter. She reached for the jar of beans. I knew she didn't have another vial of the concentrated poison. Kincaid had given her one. But I also knew that desperation makes people creative. Maybe she had pills. Maybe she had rat poison under the sink. She wasn't going to stop. She had decided I was dying tonight, and she was going to see it through. "Lydia," I said, my voice suddenly steady. The tremor was gone. The weakness was gone. She stopped, her hand on the coffee grinder. Something in my tone made her freeze. It wasn't the voice of a tired old man. "What?" she asked, not turning around. "Don't bother with the coffee," I said. I don't want any more coffee. I have some news. She turned slowly. News, what kind of news? I leaned back in the chair, crossing my arms over my chest. I looked her dead in the eye. I didn't just come back because of my back, I said. I got a notification on my phone. From the bank. Lydia went still, a statue in an apron. The bank. Yeah, I said. It seems there's been a problem with Lucas's trust fund. The fraud department called me. They said they froze the accounts this morning. Her eyes bulged. Froze them why? Suspicious activity. I lied, enjoying the way the color left her face for the second time in 5 minutes. They said someone has been making massive cash withdrawals, hundreds of thousands of dollars. They think it's money laundering, Lydia. They think it's criminal. I stood up. I stopped limping. I walked toward her, closing the distance. They said federal agents are coming to the house tomorrow morning to audit the books. I said, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. But here is the strange part. I just got a text. They said the agents are actually in the neighborhood tonight. They want to check the safe. Lydia backed up against the counter. She looked like a trapped rat. The safe tonight. Yes, I said. Tonight. I watched her eyes dart to the hallway toward the bathroom where she likely kept her phone. She needed to call him. She needed to call Kincaid. She was panicking, and panic makes people make mistakes. I need to use the restroom, she stammered, untying her apron with shaking hands. My stomach, it's the stress. Excuse me, Henry. She pushed past me and ran down the hall. I heard the bathroom door slam and the lock click. I stood in the kitchen listening. I knew exactly what she was doing. She was calling the cavalry. She was calling the muscle. She was telling Kincaid that the plan had gone sideways and that he needed to get over here right now to fix it. I smiled grimly. Come on then, I whispered, reaching back to touch the grip of my gun. Come and get it. I walked into the living room and sat in my armchair facing the front door. I checked my watch. Kincaid lived 20 minutes away, but if he drove like I thought he would, he'd be here in 10. I waited. The hunt was entering its final phase. 15 minutes. That was how long I calculated it would take for a desperate man to drive across town if he thought his life was about to implode. I sat in my leather armchair, the one facing the front door, the one I used to read bedtime stories in when the boys were small. My back was pressed against the firm cushion, allowing me to feel the reassuring hardness of the Colt 1911 tucked into my waistband. The house was silent, save for the frantic, muffled murmuring coming from the guest bathroom down the hall. Lydia was in there. I could hear the desperate cadence of her voice, though the words were indistinct. She wasn't sick. She was coordinating a hit. I looked at the clock on the mantelpiece. It was a grandfather clock I had restored myself, its pendulum swinging with a slow, rhythmic talk that sounded like a countdown. 5 minutes had passed since she ran out of the kitchen. I imagined Kincaid on the other end of the line. I imagined him throwing on his jacket, grabbing his keys, and cursing. He was probably grabbing whatever weapon he had, maybe a gun of his own, maybe just more poison. He wasn't coming here to check on a patient. He was coming here to eliminate a witness. The bathroom door opened. Lydia emerged. She had splashed water on her face, but it didn't hide the red blotches on her neck or the wild, cornered animal look in her eyes. She smoothed her apron, a futile gesture of normalcy, in a house that was about to become a war zone. She walked into the living room and stopped when she saw me sitting there, calm and still. You should be resting. Henry, she said, her voice brittle. You look terrible. Why don't you go upstairs and lie down? I can bring you some tea. Maybe chamomile. She wanted me upstairs. She wanted me in bed, defenseless, away from the front door so Kincaid could enter without resistance. She wanted to isolate me. I am fine right here, I said, resting my hands on the armrests. I want to be ready when the federal agents arrive. I wouldn't want to miss them. She flinched at the mention of the agents. She walked over to the window and peered out through the blinds, her fingers twitching against the fabric. Do you really think they will come tonight? She asked, trying to sound casual but failing miserably. It is so late. Surely they would wait until morning. Fraud units don't work bankers' hours, Lydia. I lied, enjoying the way her shoulders tensed, especially when there is suspicion of flight risk. They want to secure the assets before anyone can run. I watched her reflection in the window glass. She was terrified. She knew that if the police looked in that safe, they wouldn't just find the missing cash. They would find the illicit drugs. They would find the paper trail of their crimes. She was banking everything on Kincaid getting here first, killing me, and then clearing out the safe before the imaginary police arrived. 10 minutes. I heard the distant hum of a car engine approaching fast. Lydia heard it too. Her head snapped toward the sound. She stepped away from the window, her hand going to her throat. Is that them? She whispered. I didn't answer. I listened. The car didn't slow down like a patrol car scanning addresses. It was accelerating. It roared down the quiet suburban street and screeched into our driveway, the tires biting into the pavement. A car door slammed shut hard. That is not the police, I said softly. Lydia didn't wait. She rushed to the front door. She didn't check the peephole. She threw the deadbolt and yanked the door open. Dr. Kincaid stormed in. He brought the cold night air in with him. He looked nothing like the composed, arrogant physician I had met months ago. His hair was windblown, his eyes were manic, and he was wearing a heavy trench coat that was too warm for the season. He was sweating. He didn't look at me. He looked straight at Lydia. Where is he? He barked. Lydia pointed a shaking finger toward the living room. He is sitting right there. He knows Kincaid. He knows about the bank. He says the feds are coming. Kincaid turned his head and locked eyes with me. For a second, I saw a flicker of hesitation, the natural instinct of a man realizing he has walked into a trap. But then greed and desperation took over. He realized that I was just an old man sitting in a chair, and he was a younger, stronger man with everything to lose. He kicked the front door shut behind him. The sound echoed through the house like a thunderclap. Well, Henry, he said, his voice dropping to a menacing growl, it seems we have a problem. He walked into the living room. He didn't take off his coat. He kept his right hand buried deep in the pocket. I knew that stance. I had seen it in bad movies and on construction sites where deals went wrong. He was holding something. I didn't stand up. I stayed seated, keeping my center of gravity low, my hand inches from the gun at my back. Hello, doctor, I said. You make house calls late. Cut the crap, old man Kincaid spat. He stopped about 10 feet from me, putting himself between me and the hallway, blocking my exit. Lydia hovered behind him, peeking over his shoulder like a frightened ghost. Lydia tells me you are confused, he continued, stepping closer. She says you are hallucinating about bank freezes and federal agents. That is a symptom of advanced dementia, Henry. Paranoia, delusions. He was building the narrative. Even now, on the brink of violence, he was trying to justify it. I am perfectly lucid, I said. And I think you know that. I think you know exactly where the money went. Kincaid laughed a short, sharp bark. It doesn't matter what you think, Henry. What matters is what the death certificate says. And since I am the attending physician, I get to write whatever I want. He took another step. He was close now. Too close. I could smell the stale tobacco and fear coming off him. You are not a doctor, I said. You lost your license 5 years ago. You are a gambler who owes $800,000 to the wrong people. And now you are trying to kill me to pay your debts. The color drained from his face. The arrogance vanished, replaced by pure, murderous intent. I had stripped away his mask. I had revealed that I knew everything. There was no going back now. There was no talking our way out of this. Lydia gasped. You... How do you know that? It doesn't matter, Kincaid shouted, losing his composure completely. He pulled his hand out of his pocket. He wasn't holding a gun. He was holding a syringe. It was capped, but the plunger was drawn back, filled with a clear liquid, the same liquid Lydia had poured into my coffee. Potassium chloride. You talk too much, Henry Kincaid said, raising the needle. You are having a heart attack right now. You just don't know it yet. He lunged. He moved faster than I expected. He closed the distance in 2 strides, his arm raised to strike to jam that needle into my neck or my chest. But he made one mistake. He thought he was attacking a frail 70-year-old invalid. He thought he was attacking the man who couldn't lift his own son. He didn't know he was attacking a man who had spent 40 years hauling lumber and bending steel. I didn't cower. I didn't scream. I moved. I threw my body weight forward using the momentum to launch myself out of the chair. My left hand shot up and caught his wrist, the one holding the syringe. The impact jarred my shoulder, sending a spike of pain down my arm, but I held on. I squeezed with a grip forged by decades of manual labor. Kincaid grunted in surprise. He tried to shake me off, but I twisted his wrist, forcing the needle away from my face. At the same time, my right hand went behind my back. I felt the textured grip of the Colt. I pulled it free. I didn't aim. There was no time to aim. I just shoved the barrel into his stomach and pulled the trigger. Click. The sound was tiny, insignificant, but in that moment, it was the loudest noise in the world. A misfire. An old primer. A bad round. Kincaid heard it. He realized I had a gun, and he realized it hadn't worked. His eyes lit up with triumph. He roared and slammed his forehead into my nose. Pain exploded in my face. Bright white lights danced in my vision. I stumbled back, tasting blood. I lost my grip on his wrist. He raised the needle again. Die, you old bastard, he screamed. I racked the slide of the pistol, ejecting the dud round. It spun through the air in slow motion. A fresh round chambered. Kincaid brought the needle down. I raised the gun and fired. This time the room shook. The muzzle flash blinded us both. The vase on the mantel behind Kincaid exploded into 1,000 ceramic shards. I had missed his body, but the bullet had passed inches from his ear. The deafening roar of a .45 caliber round in an enclosed space brought everything to a screeching halt. Kincaid froze. He dropped the syringe. It clattered to the floor, rolling under the coffee table. He stumbled back, his hands going to his ears, his eyes wide with shock. Lydia screamed a high, piercing sound that shattered the ringing silence. I stood there, blood pouring from my nose, my chest heaving, the smoking gun leveled squarely at Kincaid's chest. Sit down, I commanded. My voice sounded strange, guttural, like it was coming from someone else. Kincaid looked at the gun, then at me. He saw the hammer pulled back. He saw my finger on the trigger. He saw that I wasn't going to miss again. He slowly, carefully sank to his knees, putting his hands in the air. Lydia was sobbing in the corner, clutching the curtains. "Henry, please," she wailed. "Please don't kill us." I spat a mouthful of blood onto the expensive rug she loved so much. "I'm not going to kill you," I said, wiping my nose with my sleeve. "That would be too easy." Outside, the wail of sirens began to rise, cutting through the night. Not the imaginary federal agents I had lied about, but the very real police that Hartman had called the moment I gave the signal. The cavalry was here. But the war wasn't over. I kept the gun trained on Kincaid's heart until the red and blue lights washed over the living room walls. The hunt was done. Now the reckoning began. Kincaid took a step closer, invading my personal space with the arrogance of a man who believes he holds all the cards. The air in the living room grew heavy, suffocating, charged with a violence that was no longer theoretical. I looked at his hand, the one he had finally pulled from his coat pocket. It wasn't a gun. It wasn't a knife. It was a syringe capped but clearly loaded, the plunger drawn back to reveal a chamber full of clear, lethal fluid. It was the potassium chloride. He had brought the execution method right into my living room, intending to finish what Lydia had failed to start in the kitchen. He held it up, letting the light from the hallway chandelier catch the liquid. It looked harmless, like water, but I knew it was enough to stop a heart in seconds. He smiled, a thin, cruel curving of his lips that showed no remorse, only irritation that I was making this difficult for him. "You are making this very hard on yourself, Henry," he said, his voice dropping to a patronizing whisper. "It is a shame you didn't just drink the coffee Lydia made for you. It would have been peaceful. You would have just gone to sleep in your chair. Now it is going to be a little more painful. Needles are never pleasant when you are awake." Lydia let out a small, strangled sob from behind him, but she didn't move to stop him. She stood frozen, her hands covering her mouth, watching the man she conspired with prepare to murder her husband. She was complicit in every sense of the word, her silence sealing her fate just as much as her actions. I didn't flinch. I didn't beg. I just looked at Kincaid and then shifted my gaze to the television mounted above the fireplace. It was a large, smart TV I had installed years ago to watch football games with Lucas. It was currently black, a silent monolith in the room. Kincaid followed my gaze, confused for a split second by my lack of fear. "Actually, Doctor," I said, keeping my voice level and calm, "I think we should watch a movie before you do anything rash. I think you might find the plot very interesting." Before he could react, before he could take that final step to plunge the needle into my neck, I grabbed the remote control that was resting on the side table. I didn't even have to aim. I just pressed the power button and the input switch I had pre-programmed earlier. The screen flickered to life. It wasn't a movie. It wasn't the news. It was a crystal-clear, high-definition video feed. The image was grainy with night vision, but the faces were unmistakable. It was the recording from last night. It showed my bedroom. It showed my bed. And it showed Lydia and Kincaid tangled together in the sheets, laughing. The audio boomed through the surround sound speakers, filling the living room with their voices. But I didn't stop there. I fast-forwarded the feed with a few clicks, skipping the adultery and going straight to the conspiracy. The video jumped to them standing by the dresser, Kincaid holding the very same vial he was holding now. The voice of the digital Kincaid filled the room, loud and damning. It stops the heart instantly, disrupts the electrical signals, looks exactly like a massive heart attack. No autopsy, no investigation. Then Lydia's voice, clear as a bell. "Are you sure it won't show up in a toxicology report?" The color drained from Lydia's face so fast, she looked like a corpse. She stared at the screen, watching herself plot my murder, hearing her own voice casually discussing how to get away with it. The reality of what she had done, the permanence of that recording, hit her like a physical blow. "Turn it off," she screamed, her voice cracking into a shriek of pure hysteria. "Turn it off, Henry. Turn it off right now." Kincaid stared at the TV, his mouth slightly open. He realized in that second that his life was over. His medical career was already gone, but his freedom, his future, everything was burning down in front of him. He looked from the screen to me, and the murderous intent in his eyes doubled. He realized I wasn't just a victim, I was a witness, and I had the evidence. "You recorded us," he snarled, his face twisting into a mask of pure hate. "You senile old freak. You were watching us the whole time." I smiled, a cold, hard smile that felt like granite. "Every second. I saw you poison my son. I saw you steal my money, and I saw you plan my death. And now the cloud server has seen it too." That was the breaking point. The last thread of Kincaid's control snapped. He didn't care about the money anymore. He didn't care about the plan. He just wanted to silence the man who had destroyed him. He roared a guttural sound of rage and lunged at me. He raised the syringe high, aiming for my jugular, intending to jam it in and depress the plunger before I could take another breath. At the same moment, Lydia broke. She screamed like a banshee and threw herself at me, her nails curved into claws, reaching for my face, reaching for the remote, reaching for anything she could destroy. It was chaos, a swirling storm of violence in a quiet suburban living room. But they forgot one thing. They forgot that I had spent my life building things that stood up to storms. I had spent 40 years carrying lumber, pouring concrete, and welding steel. I wasn't frail, I wasn't weak, and I was prepared. I dropped the remote. I didn't try to block them. I didn't try to wrestle. I reached behind my back. My hand found the textured grip of the Colt 1911. It was cool and heavy, a weight of authority. I drew it in one fluid motion, a motion I had practiced in the mirror 100 times. I didn't aim for Kincaid's chest. I didn't aim for Lydia. I raised the barrel toward the ceiling, toward the expensive crystal chandelier that Lydia loved so much, and I pulled the trigger. Boom. The sound was deafening. It wasn't like the movies. In the confined space of the living room, the gunshot was a physical force. It slammed into our eardrums like a hammer. The muzzle flash lit up the room like a lightning strike. The bullet smashed into the plaster ceiling, blowing a hole the size of a fist and sending a shower of white dust and crystal shards raining down on us. The vase on the mantelpiece vibrated and shattered from the shockwave. Everything stopped. Lydia screamed and dropped to the floor, covering her head with her hands curling into a ball. Kincaid froze mid-lunge. The sudden thunderous violence of the gunshot broke his momentum completely. He stumbled back, his ears ringing, his eyes wide with shock. He looked at the smoking gun in my hand, then up at my face. I wasn't the tired old husband anymore. I was the judge, the jury, and the executioner. I leveled the gun. I pointed the black barrel directly at the center of Kincaid's forehead. My hand was rock steady. My finger hovered over the trigger, taking up the slack. "Sit down," I commanded. My voice didn't sound like my own. It sounded like grinding stones. It was deep, guttural, and brooked no argument. "I am old," I said, stepping over the broken glass, closing the distance between the gun and his face. "I am tired, but I can put a bullet through your eye socket from this distance, and I promise you I will not miss." Kincaid looked at the gun. He looked at the madness in my eyes. He realized that the dynamic had shifted irrevocably. He was holding a needle. I was holding a cannon. His hand shook. The syringe, the weapon he thought would give him everything, slipped from his sweaty fingers. It hit the hardwood floor with a plastic clatter and rolled under the coffee table, useless. He slowly, agonizingly bent his knees. He sank to the floor, raising his empty hands in the air, his chest heaving with terror. "Please, Henry." Lydia wailed from the floor, her face pressed into the rug. "Please don't kill us. We can explain. We can fix this." I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes locked on Kincaid. I wanted him to see the death he had invited into this house. I wanted him to know how close he was to the edge. "You can't fix this, Lydia," I said, my voice cold. "You broke it. You broke everything." And then cutting through the ringing in our ears came the sound I had been waiting for. Sirens. Distant at first, then rising, getting louder and closer with every second. A symphony of wails converging on our street. Hartman had done his job. The moment the text went out, he had called in the cavalry. Blue and red lights began to flash through the front window, dancing across the walls, illuminating the wreckage of our lives. "The police are here," I said to Kincaid, never lowering the gun. "And you are going to stay right there on your knees until they put the cuffs on you, because if you move, if you even twitch, I will save the taxpayers the cost of a trial." Kincaid swallowed hard, nodding slowly, terror streaming down his face in the form of sweat. The front door burst open, voices shouted, heavy boots thundered into the hallway. But I didn't look away. I held the line. The hunt was over. Now the cage door was slamming shut. The front door didn't just open, it disintegrated under the force of a battering ram. Wood splinters flew through the air like confetti. A dozen men in tactical gear swarmed into the hallway, their boots thundering on the hardwood floor like a stampede. They moved with the terrifying precision of a machine designed for violence. I didn't flinch. I kept my eyes fixed on Kincaid, who was still kneeling on the rug, his hands trembling in the air. "Police, drop the weapon!" a voice roared from the doorway. It was amplified, authoritative, and brooked no argument. I didn't turn to look. I simply opened my hand and let the Colt 1911 fall to the floor. It landed with a heavy metallic thud next to the shattered vase. I raised my hands slowly, showing them my empty palms, showing them I was done. 2 officers were on Kincaid before the gun even stopped spinning. They slammed him into the floor face first, pressing his cheek into the expensive Persian rug he had helped buy with my son's money. He grunted in pain as his arms were wrenched behind his back. The sound of ratcheting handcuffs was sharp and final. "Get off me!" Kincaid screamed, spitting blood onto the floor. "I am a doctor, you animals! Get off me!" "You are a drug dealer and a murderer," a uniformed sergeant barked, hauling him up by his collar. "You have the right to remain silent, so I suggest you start using it." In the corner, Lydia was no longer huddled in a ball. She had scrambled to her feet the moment the police entered, her survival instinct kicking into overdrive. She wasn't crying anymore. She was pointing. Her finger stabbed the air toward Kincaid. Her face twisted into a mask of righteous indignation. "It was him!" she shrieked, her voice shrill and piercing. "He forced me to do it, officer. He threatened me. He said he would kill me if I didn't help him. I am a victim here. I am a victim." I watched her with a cold detachment. It was mesmerizing in a sickening way to see how quickly she turned on her lover. Minutes ago, she was ready to watch me die to save their future. Now she was throwing him to the wolves to save her own skin. Kincaid looked at her, his eyes bulging with betrayal. "You lying witch!" he roared, struggling against the officers. "You planned it all. It was your idea to poison the old man. It was your idea to drug the kid. Liar!" Lydia screamed back, desperate tears streaming down her face. "I am a grieving mother. I was just trying to protect my son." That was the breaking point. Hearing her use Lucas as a shield one last time made something snap inside me. "Protect him," I said, my voice low, but cutting through the shouting. "Is that what you call injecting him with horse tranquilizers, Lydia? Is that what you call torturing him for fun?" A detective in a cheap suit walked into the room, stepping carefully over the broken glass. It was Detective Miller, the man I had spoken to days ago. He looked from me to the chaos on the floor, and then to the television screen, where the video loop was still playing silent evidence of their crimes. "Mr. Dixon," Miller said, nodding at me. "Your lawyer, Mr. Hartman, called us. He sent over the video files. We saw everything." He gestured to 2 female officers who approached Lydia. They didn't treat her like a victim. They grabbed her wrists and spun her around, uncuffing her hands behind her back. "You are making a mistake," Lydia wailed, struggling uselessly. "I own this house. You can't do this. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder. First-degree assault and fraud," Miller said, reading her rights with a bored, professional tone. Forensics technicians were already swarming the room. One of them was kneeling by the dining table, carefully collecting the shards of the broken coffee mug. He used a swab to test the dark stain on the floor. "Positive for high concentrations of potassium chloride," the tech announced loudly. "Enough to stop a heart 3 times over." Another tech came out of the hallway holding the black medical bag Kincaid had brought in. He opened it on the coffee table. Inside were rows of vials, hundreds of pills, and stacks of cash. "We found the stash," Miller said, looking at Kincaid. "We estimate about $200,000 in street-value narcotics, mostly ketamine and opioids. And we found the ledger." He pulled a small notebook from the bag. "It looks like your wife has been busy, Mr. Dixon," Miller said, flipping through the pages. "According to this, she has handed over nearly $450,000 in cash to this man over the last 6 months. Embezzlement from a trust fund is a federal crime." $450,000. The number hung in the air. That was my son's future. That was his therapy, his comfort, his life. She had stolen $500,000 to feed a gambler's addiction and a failed doctor's ego. Lydia went limp in the officer's grip. The fight drained out of her as the reality of the numbers hit home. She looked at me, her eyes wide and pleading. "Henry," she whispered. "Henry, tell them. Tell them I was confused. Tell them I was scared. We have been married 35 years. Does that mean nothing to you?" I looked at her. I looked at the woman I had built a life with. I looked at the woman I had trusted with my heart and my home. And I felt absolutely nothing. The love had burned away, leaving only ash. 35 years, I repeated slowly, walking toward her. 35 years of lies. You didn't just steal my money, Lydia. You stole my son's voice. You stole his dignity. You tortured a defenseless man because you were bored and greedy. I leaned in close so only she could hear me. "You aren't my wife anymore," I said. "You are just inmate number whatever they give you." "Take them away," Miller ordered. The officers began to drag them toward the door. Kincaid was cursing, kicking at the shins of the cops. Lydia was sobbing loud, heaving sounds of self-pity. As they reached the doorway, Lydia twisted her head back to look at me one last time. The pleading was gone. In its place was a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. Her face was contorted, her lips pulled back in a snarl. "You will rot in this big empty house, Henry," she screamed. "You will die alone and Lucas will never recover. I made sure of that. I broke him." Her cruelty was her final weapon, her last attempt to hurt me before she lost all power. I stood in the center of my ruined living room, surrounded by police and broken glass, and I smiled. It was a cold, hard smile. "Don't worry about Lucas," I called out to her as they shoved her through the door. "He is going to be fine. I am going to spend every penny of that trust fund on the best doctors in the world." She was halfway down the walkway, but I knew she could still hear me. "And Lydia," I shouted, walking to the doorframe, "don't think you will be lonely in prison. I am going to send a copy of that video to the warden. I am going to make sure every woman in that cell block sees exactly what you did to a crippled boy." She froze for a second, her step faltering. She knew what happened to child abusers in prison. She knew that there was a hierarchy, and she had just hit the bottom of it. The police car door slammed shut, cutting off her scream. I watched as the lights flashed against the trees, red and blue, red and blue. The engines revved and the cars pulled away, taking the cancer that had been eating my family with them. I stood on the porch for a long time, watching the taillights fade into the darkness. The night air was cool and clean. The sirens faded, replaced by the chirping of crickets. I turned back to the house. It was a mess. There were holes in the ceiling glass on the floor and blood on the rug. But for the first time in years, it felt clean. The rot was gone. I walked upstairs. I ignored the master bedroom. I went straight to Lucas's room. The police had cleared it, checking for evidence, but they had left him alone. He was still lying there, the green poison slowly working its way out of his system. I sat down in the chair beside his bed. I took his hand. It was still cold, but I held it tight. "It is over, son," I whispered. "The monsters are gone. Daddy is here." And as the first gray light of dawn began to creep through the window, I swore that I would rebuild. I was a contractor. I knew how to fix broken things, and I was going to fix him no matter what it cost. 6 months. That is how long it has been since the blue lights faded from my driveway, and the silence returned to my life. But it is not the heavy, suffocating silence of a house filled with secrets anymore. It is the clean, crisp silence of the mountains. I couldn't stay in the suburbs. I couldn't walk down that hallway where I almost died, or look at the kitchen table where my wife tried to poison me. Every corner of that house was stained with betrayal. So I did what any good contractor does when a structure is condemned. I walked away from the rubble. I sold the Colonial for cash 3 days after Lydia was denied bail. I didn't care about the market value. I just wanted it gone. I took Lucas and we moved north up into the high country, where the air is thin and cold and smells like pine instead of antiseptic. I bought a small ranch house on 50 acres of land. It is single-story wheelchair accessible with a wide wraparound porch that looks out over a valley that turns gold in the sunset. There are no neighbors to spy on us. There are no dinner parties. There is just us, the wind in the trees, and the long, slow road to recovery. The first 3 months were the hardest of my life. Harder than the construction sites, harder than the nights I spent in that motel room. The withdrawal from the horse tranquilizers was brutal. Kincaid had pumped so much of that green filth into my son's system that his body didn't know how to function without it. Lucas sweated, he shook, he had terrors that made him scream without sound. There were nights when I sat by his bed holding his hand while he fought demons I couldn't see, wondering if I had saved him, only to watch him die from the cure. But I didn't do it alone. I used the money. That $4.8 million that Lydia had coveted so much, I put it to work. I didn't buy sports cars. I didn't buy jewelry. I hired Dr. Evans, a neurologist from Johns Hopkins who specializes in chemical brain injury. I hired a team of 3 physical therapists who rotate shifts so that Lucas is never alone, never neglected, never in pain. I turned the guest wing of the ranch into a state-of-the-art rehabilitation center. Every penny that Lydia tried to steal is now being funneled directly into the veins and muscles of the man she tried to break. And slowly, miraculously, the fog began to lift. It started with his eyes. The glazed, dead look that had haunted me for 2 years began to fade. He started tracking movement. He started watching the birds at the feeder outside his window. Then the motor control returned. A twitch of a finger. The turning of a head. Small victories that felt like winning the Super Bowl. Yesterday was the breakthrough. It was a Tuesday, a warm afternoon, with a breeze coming off the mountain. I had wheeled Lucas out onto the porch to watch the sunset. We were sitting there drinking iced tea, listening to the crickets start their evening chorus. I was talking to him, just rambling about the fence I was fixing, about the deer I saw in the garden. I treated him like he was there, like he was listening, just like I always promised I would. I stopped talking to take a sip of my tea, and that is when I heard it. A sound. A rough, scratchy sound like sandpaper on wood. I turned to look at him. Lucas was looking at me. His face was contorted with effort, the muscles in his neck straining against the atrophy. His mouth was open. His lips moving, trying to remember shapes they hadn't formed in years. I leaned in close, my heart hammering in my chest. "Dad," he rasped. It was barely a whisper. It was weak and broken. But it was the most beautiful sound I have ever heard in 70 years on this earth. Tears sprang to my eyes, hot and fast. "I am here, son," I choked out, grabbing his hand. "I am right here." He took a breath, a shallow, rattling gasp of air. He focused all his energy, all his will into one more effort. "Thank," he wheezed. "You, Dad. Thank you." 3 words. 3 simple words that washed away every second of pain, every moment of doubt, every ounce of the trauma from that night in the living room. My son was back. He wasn't fully healed, not yet. He still couldn't walk. He still had a mountain to climb. But the man inside the shell had kicked down the door. He was present. He was alive. And he knew that I had saved him. I wept. I put my head on his chest, and I cried like a baby holding on to him, feeling the steady, strong beat of his heart. A heart that was still beating because I didn't drink that coffee. A heart that was beating because I bought a camera. We sat there until the sun went down and the stars came out. It was the first time in years that I didn't feel old. I felt useful. I felt like a father. People ask me if I miss her, if I miss Lydia. We were married for 35 years. You don't just erase that kind of time. And the truth is, sometimes in the quiet moments before sleep, I do miss the lie. I miss the woman I thought she was. I miss the idea of the partner who stood by me. But then I remember the neon green vial. I remember the look on her face when she handed me the poison. And the missing is replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I am 70 years old. I have lost my wife. I have lost my home. I have lost the illusion of a happy retirement. By all accounts, I should be a broken man. But when I look into my son's eyes, when I see the light of intelligence returning to them, that I am the richest man in the world. I learned a hard lesson that night with the gun in my hand. Sometimes you cannot just patch a crack. Sometimes the rot is so deep, the termites are so thick, that you have to take a sledgehammer to the walls. You have to tear the roof off and let the sunlight burn out the infection. You have to destroy the home you built to save the people living inside it. I did what had to be done. I burned my life down to the ground. But here in the mountains, in the clean air, with my son holding my hand, I am finally ready to pour a new foundation. And this time I am building it with truth. If this story has taught you anything, let it be this: trust your gut. That voice in the back of your head that says something is wrong, that whispers when the numbers don't add up, or when a smile doesn't reach the eyes that is your survival instinct. Don't silence it. Don't ignore it, because you are afraid of what you might find. We want to believe the best in the people we love. We want to believe that our spouses, our family, the people we share our beds with, have our best interests at heart. But blind trust is a luxury you cannot afford when lives are on the line. Evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like a devoted wife holding a bottle of herbal supplements. Sometimes it wears a doctor's coat. Be vigilant. Protect the vulnerable. And if you ever find yourself holding a cup of coffee that smells like betrayal, don't drink it. Drop it, break it, and then fight like hell. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps the channel grow, and let me know in the comments. Have you ever had a gut feeling that saved you? I read every single comment. Stay safe out there and watch your back.